Hello, everybody. Somebody call 911. Um, I'm not sure why we're calling. Oh, Abbasid collapsed. Oh, it's funny because it's true. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another adventure in history. I hope that you all are having a pleasant day, or afternoon, or really early in the morning, depending on where you are in the world. Um, it's been an interesting day around here. I started doing additional Tolkien research, started reading back through this honking volume, The Letters of J.R.R. Tolkien. It's a book that I've read before, but it's been probably 16-ish years since I've read them. It's been a long time, and they're voluminous. So there are a lot of them. If you're wondering why I have two page markers, you got to have one in the text and one in the footnotes. That's how real historians read books. But anyway, they're really interesting, and I'm hoping to get information out of those for upcoming Tolkien lectures and stuff like that. So that's what I've been up to for part of the day. I did a little bit of cleaning. The stream room needed to be swept and stuff like that, and got to do what you got to do to get everything ready. Viper, what up? Good to see you. Matt, welcome in. Is this a duck emote? It is a duck. It's just duck high. As a historian, what are your thoughts on how we almost never write paper letters anymore? I honestly kind of think it's, I don't know, okay, so I'm a bit of an odd duck to carry on with the theme. I think it's interesting that we don't write paper letters anymore. So there is the economic aspect of it where, it's just cheaper to send email. There's the environmental aspect of it where, you spend money to send something via vehicle that, puts gas in the air and carbon dioxide in the air, and you cut down trees to make paper and stuff like that. But I don't know, this might just be me being weird, but there's something sort of interesting about actually writing letters. And I have found myself, especially in the last few months, really thinking like I should write letters to people. But the issue, of course, is that we now have such easier modes of communication. If I have this stray topic that I want to bring up with a friend or even somebody that I haven't spoken with in a while, it takes me 20 seconds to type out a text and send them a text message. So it's definitely an outmoded form of communication, but I do think that there's something interesting about it. And I will say this. I was writing a short story. I got this idea for a short story. And I won't go into the whole story, but basically this particular person was stuck alone in a cabin without electricity, and the only thing left that they had was a yellow legal pad. And they were sort of writing out their justification for events that had happened before, et cetera, et cetera. And the story has this little preface, this account was transcribed from handwritten notes written on a yellow legal pad found at this particular cabin. And I thought it was an interesting sort of process to actually handwrite that out as a story. So I actually hand wrote the story. And it was a really, really interesting experience because I found myself using different words and choosing different syntax and stuff like that because it was easier to write as instead of being easier to type. And that was a really interesting concept. So I might actually try to write more stuff by hand when I'm doing creative writing. Because it really did not just like, haha, it felt different. It really did feel different. So, I don't know if that answers your question. That's probably way more information than you wanted. But you actually read a short Tolkien letter on Letters of Note just the other day. There we go. I am weird. I appreciate the validation of my affirmation, KP. But you're not sure that this is an example. You freak out the UPS guys. A letter? What does it mean? It's actually from that book, so you won't copy and paste it. Well, there we go. It's just him saying that he wished he had a typewriter for the Fëanorian script. Ah, yeah. What's really crazy, though, is that he was a super duper slow typist. The entire typescript of Lord of the Rings was written out on a typewriter that he usually had in his lap while he was in bed. And he was a very slow typist, and he typed with 2 fingers. So imagine trying to type out the entire Lord of the Rings from a giant sheaf of handwritten notes with a typewriter. So that's kind of crazy. Exactly, Moose. They make up everything. We just can't trust those people. What's going on, Miss Frizzle? How's it going? Slower than George R. R. Martin with a G. So Tolkien started the earliest parts of Lord of the Rings in 1937. Which was, or 37 or 38, because The Hobbit got published in 37. And it took him almost 20 years to get all 3 of the books for Lord of the Rings published. Because he submitted the first one, and they were just like, the first typescript draft of Lord of the Rings was collected volume, and he sent this into the publishers, and there was like, no, there's no way we can publish this whole thing. And he's like, it's one book. And they basically had to appeal to his cheapskate side. And they were like, look, if you want people to be able to afford this, nobody's going to be able to afford this gigantic book that's going to cost us, a crap ton of money to print. It's over 1,000 pages, and you want to add all these appendices and stuff like that. And there was a war in between. That's true, Brass Wind Chimes. There was indeed. And honestly, one of the costs that was most prevalent was because of the war. So after World War II, paper in Britain was really, really expensive. And, publishing a 1,000+ page book was just going to cost way too much for the average person to be able to buy. So, More thinking like that in the present and the future, having volumes to read of important letters won't happen. Yeah, it does seem like we're losing something there. Brian, I do always point out that we are about, one really bad electromagnetic pulse away from losing a substantial portion of our collective knowledge, right? Because electric information might be great for the internet and might be great for all that stuff. But if we had to start over, a lot of our data would be gone, right? A lot of it would just evaporate with the electricity. So there is literally stuff that we're losing in the case of stuff like that that's not being published, or that's being published in such small runs that it would be easy for it to be completely lost forever. We would get set back fairly substantially if we lost access to electricity. So there is something absolutely being lost in that sense. And historically speaking, the amount of data that we have, even if we were to continue with electricity throughout the ages of the future, the amount of data that we're creating right now makes it virtually impossible to do a lot of research in the way that people have done research in the past. You sort of have to do different types of things because everything now is available without fact checking. Everything now is available to just whomever with whatever. There's not a lot of filter between the average person's thoughts and being preserved forever on the internet. So you can't really trust that these events have been transcribed properly. There's a lot of ins and outs about stuff like that. Thinking back to times when we would handwrite and then type things. Yeah. I don't know. I kind of like handwriting stuff. I'm going to have to probably going to have to start working on that stuff. You're on a diet. Suffering from caloric deficit. If you talk more crap than normal, just ignore me. I ignore you anyway, so. Then again, sometimes we just have to nuke your 150 open browser tabs. Yeah, right. You're saying you should write a letter instead of sending an email. Probably the best way to send something to a Nasir is going to be on clay tablet and cuneiform, because if you send him a letter today, he's still not going to be able to read your script. You can't imagine trying to do historical research in these times. I do one or the other, though. No, yeah, exactly. Right. I think he'll just have ChatGPT handwrite my letters. Okay, now we've just gone full circle, right? We're now back to not even thinking at all. Goodness gracious. I have atrocious handwriting, so even if I write all of your thoughts out, nobody would be able to decipher it. I mean, I guess that's fair. Tolkien's handwriting isn't easy to read. There's actually an example here in the first page of a transcribed letter that he wrote. And it's not the easiest script to read. So this is basically just a photo reproduction of one of his letters. And he has really interesting script, but it's not the easiest to work your way through. But anyway, you have to practice for it to be nice. Yeah, and see, I'm losing mine. But anyway, we're 12 minutes into the stream and I haven't said a lick of history yet. So, welcome to Adventures in History. You like the way those parentheses look? What's up, Tad? Good to see you, man. Yeah, this, by the way, is about to be a really cheap book. This is the version that came out. Well, this is the updated version. The original version of these came out in 81. This one was updated, I believe, in like 94 with additional materials. 95, I apologize. But they are about to release an expanded version of those, and I didn't know that until after I had purchased my copy of that one. That's going to have a whole collection of new letters in it that have previously never been published before. So there's going to be an expanded version with thousands of more words of material in it that's coming out later on this year. So, yep, bought that book too early. They are pre-selling the hardcover, and it's only $40, so I might ask for that for a birthday present or something. I don't know. We've probably spent enough money this year, but that's... I'm digressing. Let's talk about the Abbasid Caliphate, because that's what we're supposed to be talking about tonight. So in Adventures in History, once again, what we do, if you are new or if you haven't been around very much, we talk about history, we talk about world history in chronological order, and we do so in the form of regional appraisals that take about a century to cover. So we have been looking at the world in the 10th century, which is the year 900 to the year 1000. And we started over in the national or international date line over in the farthest part of East Asia, and we have been working our way across the continents. And tonight we're looking at roughly this area, which was the Abbasid Caliphate. And the Abbasid Caliphate had been one of the most powerful political entities on earth during its golden age back in the 800s. It had been one of the most advanced scientific, mathematical, and artistic zones in the entire world. The capital city of Baghdad was one of the largest cities in the world, and they sat on the top of a lot of the trade that moved from Asia to Europe and Africa. So they were incredibly rich, incredibly powerful, and were well placed to capitalize on all of these particular opportunities that came their way. And if we look at them in the earliest parts of the 900s, if we pick up right around the time of the 900s, we're going to look at something that looks like this. So we have the Abbasid Caliphate. What's up, Allie? You have the Abbasid Caliphate that sat right here. Notice this also controlled this region here of Arabia, which is what we refer to as the Hijaz, which I'll type here in chat. This particular area is between the larger Arabian Plateau and the Red Sea. There's a strip of semi-arid land with a lot of oases. This is where Mecca and Medina are, by the way. So here's Mecca and here's Medina. This part was still controlled directly by the Caliphate, but we find them in the late 800s fighting a rebellion by these people here called the Tulunids, who controlled Egypt and what we might call the Levantine region, part of Syria. The Tulunids had started their, Tulunids had started their rebellion in 868, but we are going to see them defeated in 905. And when we get to 905, the Abbasid Caliphate's looking pretty good. We've got a stable leadership. The caliph is a guy named al-Muqtafi. And it looks okay. We put down a rebellion. We're going to re-secure the areas that had rebelled. We're going to put down some trouble that had been going on over around Iran. We're going to be able to pass the caliph title down stably, which had not really happened with a lot of stability during part of the late 800s. And they're going to get back to being sort of the golden age caliphate that we might expect them to be. They're going to go back to doing stuff like sponsoring architecture, science and learning. There's going to be even some military recovery. One of their largest enemies, who we'll talk about, al-Muqtafi. I guess I should type his name, huh? Al-Muqtafi. Now, you might see this sometimes spelled with a Q here instead of a K. So, like this, Al-Muqtafi. But we'll spell it like this, Al-Muqtafi. Al-Milk Toffee. I like toffee a lot. That's what's brewing. Anyway, so things are going pretty well, and they're going to have a big enemy over in this region that is the Byzantine Empire. We've talked about the Byzantines multiple times in the past, but effectively what if we go back in time, you might think of as Eastern Rome. Not quite the same anymore, but the revival part of the Roman Empire over here. The Abbasids are going to have a lot of success taking land over here in what is today the country of Turkey. And due to some really cunning naval advances here in the Aegean, they're even going to land a force over here in Greek proper. And one of the biggest military victories of this time period is a sack of the city of Thessalonica, which happens in 904. This is a really, really big moment for the Abbasids. They had not been particularly successful against the Byzantines for quite some time, and this is sort of a sign that things are kind of on the mend. But it doesn't last. We have a bit of a mess with our next series of caliphs, most notably a new guy gets put on the throne, and he's not even really a guy. Caliph named Al-Muqtadir. He ends up getting put on the throne. He was not the guy that sort of achieves this position by favor and skill. He gets picked because he's a 13-year-old kid. And we all know what happens when you put a 13-year-old kid on the throne. You've got somebody else that's pulling the strings, right? And Al-Muqtadir is absolutely not capable of running the country by himself. But there are multiple other polar sets of power, and his mother is one of them. The military is another one, and then the what we might call bureaucratic nobles. So these people that had worked their way into very powerful positions within the government, especially the position of vizier. So when you put a 13-year-old kid on the throne, you know that this guy's not going to have an easy go of things. He's not going to just get to make decisions by himself. He's not going to get to run the country by himself. And of course, as soon as he's put on the throne, there is a military revolt. The military is going to end up splitting. Some of the people are going to try to get rid of this guy. The military leaders that were instrumental in putting al-Muqtadir in the position are going to beat down this other group. But in the process of this mess, there's going to be a lot of changes that start happening. And this is early. So this is in the early 920s. And there's going to be a big old mess. Most notably, the situation with Egypt. Was there an al-Bundi in this place? No, he was a little bit later and led them to various polo championships. They make the taxes chocolate and Coke. Yeah, that's what happens. Oh man, speaking of carbonated beverage, I shared this with the chat, with my mod chat earlier today. Pepsi has decided that they are going to make a condiment that they're provisionally calling like cola chip, which is effectively the consistency of ketchup but tastes like Pepsi. And they say that this is a hot dog garnish. So you're supposed to get this Pepsi flavored ketchup thing and put it on hot dogs. And I don't know why. Why do we need this in the world? Is this really what, as a society, we have reached for? Is this the apex of creation of 2023? No, it's not okay. Yeah, I know. It sounds absolutely atrocious. I don't want it. And I don't know if they're banking on people hate buying it. Like, oh, we got to buy at least one thing to see how it tastes. No, I'm not gonna. You blame capitalism. That's a fair target to blame. Theo Rex, what's up? Good to see you. If 1/5 of Pepsi drinkers buy it out of loyalty, it will make money. That's fair. Frank, good to see you. You just take the sugar out and add Pepsi. Ugh. Yeah, KP's response was just the gif of Michael Scott screaming no. Which I think is an appropriate response. Anyway, that was absolutely a tangent, and I don't even really know where that came. Well, I guess it came from what happens when you put a 13-year-old on the throne. They give you chocolate and Coke for taxes. Anyway, while al-Muqtadir is in the position of power, this coup is going to get put down, but the Abbasid Caliphate is going to suffer massive losses. Most notably, there is going to be a rebellion led by a group of people called the Fatimids. Now, I spelled that wrong. Fatimids. So, first off, who were the Fatimids? Well, they were a group that started over here in this region, which is what the Muslims, or the Abbasid Caliphate, or the previous Rashidun and Umayyad Caliphates, referred to as the Ifriqiya province. So, Africa, right? Right around over here. So, the Fatimids were a particular type of Shia. And the two big denominations, for lack of a better word, of Islam are the Sunni and the Shia. Now, there are other smaller denominations of of Islam, but those are the two largest groups. And they have fundamentally different views on how Islam should be run, and they have specific different views on religious theology, specifically stuff like end of the world theology. The Sunni are nominally going to be people that supported the idea that the best person in Islam should be the ruler of Islam. The Shia are going to be much more strict and say, no, 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 it must be someone from the family of Muhammad that is the ruler of Islam. And specific sects of Shia are going to count the number of caliphs a little bit differently. Some believe that there were 7 imams after Muhammad. Some are 12 imams after Muhammad. Yes, and Fatima was his daughter. So the Fatimids are going to be a specific group of Shia that trace their heritage back to the family of Fatima, who was Muhammad's daughter. Frank put it together. Great job. So this particular group is going to end up claiming that they are the rightful rulers of Islam. And because of the trouble over here in Abbasid homeland, the Ifriqiya province over here is going to lose a little bit of care, and they're going to end up rebelling. And if it was just the Ifriqiya province that was causing trouble, that would be one thing. But the rebellion of the Fatimids spreads down into Egypt. And if you'll remember, we just talked about the Tulunids being in rebellion during the end of the 800s. They had a lot of people in Egypt that didn't really care for the way that the Abbasids were running things. There were a lot of hurt feelings there. So they sort of lumped themselves in with the larger Fatimid cause. And before you know it, the Fatimids are also going to expand here into the Levantine region. So if we look at what the Fatimid rebellion ends up doing, it ends up taking all of this territory away from the Abbasids. And this is, to be clear, an enormous amount of territory that the Abbasids lose. So they're losing this region, which again is the Levantine or Mediterranean coast. They're losing Mecca and Medina. They lose Egypt. They lose all of northern Africa. This is a huge, huge loss. Dr. Pepper mustard incoming. There was a Dr. Pepper shake at Whataburger that I almost tried and I didn't because I feared it wouldn't be that great. KP had one and said it was okay, and then I didn't actually go in for it, but I sort of regret not trying it now. I honestly, if I were being forced to choose between Cola Chip and Dr. Pepper mustard, I would almost certainly go with Dr. Pepper mustard. If we're being faced with the weird choices, that's what I'm going to have to go with. You've also had the Bluebell Dr. Pepper ice cream. How is that, KP? And knowing that I love Dr. Pepper, would I appreciate it? The summertime flavor of Bluebell that I'm particular to is the oatmeal cream pie version, which tastes exactly like a Little Debbie oatmeal cream pie. It has little bits of oatmeal cookie in it. It's, oh my gosh, it's amazing. Both were good, but missing something without the carbonation. Okay. I might see if I can find some of that Bluebell in a small packet. I don't know if I want an entire half gallon of that. Everybody's weird. Normal is a setting on a washing machine. It does have pints. It comes in pints? I have already missed the Grimace shake. I think that was yesterday, right? Because yesterday was Grimace's birthday. Anyway, you can see that the Fatimid Caliphate is going to be a threat. And we will talk much more about them in just a little bit. Love the Lord of the Rings reference. I'm not sure exactly which one I did. I do those all the time. But... oh, wait. Oh, okay. It comes in pints. Okay, there we go. There. I don't know what a Grimace Shake tastes like. I just know that there was a whole thing on TikTok doing some sort of challenge where if you drank it, Grimace came and killed you in a horrible way. So, I don't know. Also, Mojo Jojo, I appreciate the Spice Girl. Not Spice Girls. Spice Girls. What the freaking crap am I saying here? They're made with sugar and spice and everything nice and Chemical X. They're the Powerpuff Girls. Good gracious. Holy crap. Grimace is a mascot for McDonald's. He's a big purple troll thing. Powerpuff Girls, yes, I know. Spice Girls. What in the heck am I saying? I was playing the introduction in my head and I just ran my mouth faster than my brain. Or my brain faster than my mouth, rather. My nickname for a little while was JoJo. Because there was another coworker of mine whose nickname was Mojo. And when we were on shift together, we were Mojo Jojo. Because we always got in trouble and got everybody else in trouble. So there we go. The Fatiman Rebellion is going to be a big issue. And we'll come back to that. Now, there are also a group of people called the Karmatians. And the Karmatians are going to be big trouble on their own. They are going to start in this portion of Arabia, and during a period of particular chaotic phase, or I don't know, during a particular part of the stuff where it gets really, really bad, they actually go all the way across Arabia and sack Mecca, which is, you would not think of a Muslim force sacking Mecca, but they do. So this is the 101 Karmatians. That would have been a much better title for the night. I'm sort of sad that I didn't think of that one myself, but that's it. Stream ruined. We'll try again next week. Oh yeah, thanks Moose for calling me out on my horribleness and my error. Anyway, you can see here that the Karmatians are going to take what is basically the western shore of the Persian Gulf. They're going to try to take Baghdad, and they raid just outside of Baghdad city limits, but they actually do come over here and raid and sack Mecca. This causes a lot of trouble, especially with who gets to control the religious sites in Mecca during this time. It's really, really nasty. While the Karmatian Rebellion and the Fatiman Rebellion is going on, the Byzantines are going to take responsibility of their territory a little bit more seriously, and they're going to strike back against the Abbasids and retake territory in Armenia and in Syria. So things are going not so great for the Abbasids. There is a coup in 928 that is going to it's going to succeed for a few days. It manages to get al-Muqtadir out of Baghdad, but the coup fails after a couple of days in power, and al-Muqtadir is able to get back in, or the forces that are moving around him put him back in. And then he actually is going to die in battle trying to defend Baghdad in 932. Because Baghdad is just, it's the capital, so everybody's going to try to attack it. So in 932, al-Muqtadir is dead, and you go, okay, well, that's rid of the kid king, or the kid caliph, so maybe an adult shows up and is able to take over and runs things more smoothly. No. In fact, it actually gets worse. The next caliph doesn't make it more than 2 years. He gets blinded, and the coup that kicks him out says that they killed him, when in fact they actually threw him in jail secretly. What's really kind of crazy about this is he ends up living in jail for like a decade, And about a decade later, the new caliph figures out, hey, wasn't this that guy? And they're like, oh yeah. So they end up letting him out of jail, but he's been blinded, so he lives as a beggar for the rest of his life. It's messed up. The caliph after that guy is going to create a really important position that becomes what is effectively the new person in command, if we're really, really being honest. Double secret probation, right? You get it's I don't know, man. The thought was that if they killed the caliph, God would get really mad at them, but you've already blinded him, and he's already in prison. So like, is God just going to get miffed at you instead of angry? Anyway, this position is called Amir al-Umara, and this particular position is sort of like a military advisor, vice president, assistant Supreme Court justice, all wrapped up in one. But reality, if we're looking at what reality was, it became the new position of power. You had a caliph, but the emir was really the one running the country. And the assistant regional manager, not assistant to the regional manager. Separation of power is not much of a thing. And that's a good thing to point out, Unreal Brian. It's fair to remember that as caliph, the person sitting in that position had all power. There was not a separation of church and state. And in fact, in many of these situations, the caliph was, the head of the religion, the head of the judiciary, the head of the military, the head of the state. They were like a president and a pope and joint chiefs of staff and the Supreme Court all wrapped up into one, right? You didn't really have separation of powers at this point. It was just one guy. But the Amir al-Umara is going to have some of that jurisdiction, but in reality, they're going to be saying stuff, and then the caliphs from this point forward are going to rubber stamp everything that the emir wants. Because the caliphs are bad. Do so many religions call it the Holy Land because of all of the graves? Well, that's part of it, sure. That's where the grave of Jesus is, right? That's where the grave of the early prophets are. The Holy. When you say Holy Land, most people are talking about the modern day country of Israel. There aren't as many graves there that directly relate to Islam as there are those that relate to Christianity and Judaism. Specifically, the issue is that the Abrahamic religions all look at this area as religiously important, and the Holy Land comes from the old Jewish tradition that God designated this area for his people. So that's where it originally comes from, that particular phrase. So the emirs are going to change the caliph when they feel like it. They're not going to let them get too much power. They're also not going to let them get too old or get them into a position where they might be able to make decisions for themselves. And the next 4 caliphs are only going to make it 12 years combined, which is not because of term limits. It's not like they got really democratically minded and were like, you know what, we think 3 years is a good term for a caliph, and then you should sit out for a while. No, it's because they end up like getting killed, or they get kicked out, or they just get sent off into exile, because the emirs are going to be the ones that want to run the country. Around this time, the capital city of Baghdad is actually going to fall to the Buyid dynasty. We talked about them last time we were doing an adventure in history. The Buyids were another one of these Shia groups that had taken control over here in Iran and moved over and took Baghdad. So at this point, there's not even an Abbasid control in the capital. Now they do keep the caliph around as a figurehead because it's good to keep some level of consistency here. But as a way to try to fight back against all of these different rebels and invaders, one of the things that the Abbasids is going to do is start reaching out to new people that are outside of their system to try to convert them. And one of the groups that they start looking at are people that live up in this region who are Turks. And a specific group of Turks, the Oghuz Turks, are going to be pretty frequent targets of conversation for soldiers and for advisors, especially during the 960s and 970s. And then by the time you get to the 980s, some of these Turks are going to start converting to Islam. And in 985, a particularly important group of Oghuz Turks named the Seljuks are going to convert to Islam. So if you know anything about the Seljuks, you'll know that these are going to be a pretty big deal in not too long. But that's for next century. Or if you go back and watch the viewer request episode for the First Crusade. Your shield have asked this before now, but are Adventures in History 1 through 143 easily accessible? Yes, I do try to keep all of my VODs. So if you go to my link that Viper just shared right there, they're in a few different collections. So you can go to videos and then you'll click collections. The earlier episodes of Adventures in History are in Volume 1. The more recent ones are in Volume 2. And the viewer requests are in a different one, and History of Middle-earth is in a different one. So they should all be in chronological order. I spent what I can only describe as way too much time trying to make sure that they were all in order. I didn't manage to save all of the VODs. There were a few that managed to delete themselves. So this stuff normally will go away, and you have to sort of go in and highlight stuff and tell it to save it. So not all of them are there, but the vast majority of them are there. And if you're looking for something specific, you're always welcome to shoot me a message and say, hey, have you talked about this thing? And I will let you know if we have, and then give you the specific number. Almost as sweet as cola chip. Anyway, so that's what's going on chronologically speaking with all of the killing and the death and the murder and the stuff like that. But what's going on culturally in this period of time? We've got all these different political things running around, but if we're looking at the larger Muslim world during this particular time, why is all of this chaos happening? What's actually going on that makes this stuff really play out this way? And in a twist of fate, this channel's VODs will be the only source of history that future researchers will have access to. If that's the case, I do hope that I've at least tried my best to be as bias-free as possible. No human talking is ever bias-free unless they're talking about something like math or something of that nature that's directly, like if I say 2 + 2 is 4, that's okay. But if I'm talking about history, there's no such thing as purely bias-free history. But I do my best to try to eliminate as much of it as possible. I do try to just relay the facts here. It's not Shane's take on history. If you want that, you can summon the opinion hat, and I'll tell you what my opinion is. But I try to just be down the middle on a lot of this stuff. And that's not always sat well with everybody. I know that there are some people that don't come around anymore because I've not agreed with their particularly biased interpretations of history, and that made them a little upset, so they left. But them's the bricks, right? Your videos will be the year 3000's version of the Arabic translation of Aristotle. I appreciate that. If that's the case, I'll be remembered forever as an idiot. Hey, how many times have I had to stop myself and go, hey, no, that's not right. Right. Infernal said, hey, Infernal, a philosophical question. As a historian, how can you tell what's true when two sides have their own version of something and there's no way to get the facts? That's a great question. So the answer is usually, where is the most evidence? If we have a written account from one side and a written account from the other side, what elements of them agree, right? What parts of them are going to overlap? That stuff, fairly okay to accept in most situations. But textual criticism is a big thing, right? You can't just take stuff at face value. Just because somebody in the ancient world wrote it down doesn't mean it's accurate. And I do my best to try to say stuff like, if you read the sources, it says this. A lot of the stuff that we have now is more verifiable than it actually used to be for a big reason, and that is the advance of archaeology. If I've got a piece of writing that says, I conquered this city in this year, and we go, okay, cool. This guy claims that he conquered a city. All right. And then I start going out and I start excavating and I find what I think might be the remains of this city. Right? And I hit a certain level in archaeology strata or archaeological strata, and there's a burn layer. And I go, wow, there's a burn layer that coincides with about the time that this guy said he destroyed this city. And then in that burn layer, we find stuff like weapons from another culture that aren't supposed to be there. Like, oh crap, this is a Urartian sword in a Assyrian city. And that guy said that he beat up this Assyrian city and burned it to the ground. And obviously they were fighting and it burned. This is now a much more credible account. But we can't do that always, right? There are just periods of history where we don't know. And we're basing a lot of this stuff off of, if we're just being real and honest, very, very, very educated guesses. Now, the way that we interpret the data that we have is where the bias comes in. Because if I look at a source that agrees with my general description of what happened in history and I go, oh yeah, this agrees with me, so I'm not going to be skeptical of this source. Well, that's me being biased, and that's also me accepting the bias of the author that wrote it in the first place. And you can't necessarily always accept what people wrote. And this happens a lot, especially when you have big empires that are surrounded by smaller countries, where the empires are stable enough to support a professional person that writes histories. And you have this person who writes about these other cultures. This happens all the time in the ancient world. A lot of the primary source documentation that we have from some of these smaller countries comes from these bigger empires, And we also have to understand, if I'm if I'm a historian, and I'm a historian in Song Dynasty China, right? So around this time period in the late 900s, down here in southern China, we have the Song Dynasty. Now, all around them, in this Southeastern Asian area, there are developing countries. There's Srivijaya, right? There's Da Viet, there's the Champa, there's Angkor. Um, those countries don't have histories that have been preserved as well as Chinese history. But Chinese historians talk about those cultures quite a bit because China traded with all of them. But if I'm reading a Chinese account of what's going on in, I don't know, Srivijaya down here, do I take that at face value? No, of course not. I have to understand how the ancient Chinese viewed those people, and then I have to filter the data that they recorded historically through that particular bias. And I go, oh, well, that's not necessarily the way that it might have been completely. So what of this can we take as valuable? All of it is valuable to an extent, but some of it is more valuable than others, right? I know that's a very long-winded answer, but it's a very difficult question that is it's a very prevalent issue that exists within history, and it's a way that people have used history towards their own benefit many, many times, where they interpret stuff in a way that benefits their particular worldview, and then they use this history as a basis to justify their actions, and that just, it doesn't sit well with the people that are trying to do history as unbiased as possible. But everybody's got a bias, right? I said that off the top. But that's a great question. These allegations have made you philosophical, huh? Maybe. You're so deep you wear glasses. Nice. Easy answer. You look at another close by region from the same time period and see how close it matches from both sources. That's fair. You can do some of that too, but then you end up with regional variances, right? Where this region is sort of always at odds with that region, so you have the same kind of thing. But yeah, external sources are great. If you can get multiple sources that talk about the same event, that's excellent. Archaeological evidence. Yep. So if you don't have the evidence, you just sort of guess. Okay, so here's the thing. Like if I give you a puzzle and you don't have the box to look at the actual picture, you just have the puzzle pieces, and you put the puzzle together, and right in the middle of the puzzle there are 3 pieces missing, right? Now you can't say for certain what those 3 pieces actually look like with 100% certainty, because you don't know. They are not there. You do not have them. But you have a lot of other evidence around it, and you even have some evidence of those pieces because you can see what the outlines of those pieces look like, but you can't 100% be certain what those are. But if I gave you some markers, you could probably make it look right. The same sort of thing happens in just about every academic area. There are things that we don't know about in just about every academic part. Science doesn't know everything, math doesn't know everything, physics doesn't know everything, but you look at what's around it and you get the best guess that you can. And one day if you flip over the couch cushions and find one of those pieces, you look at the marker stuff that you did and you look at the actual piece, and then you have to be able to accept the piece that's there, because now you have the piece that fits in the whole. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of arguing comes in the modern world, especially with history, because we're finding more of the pieces now because of the inclusion of stuff like science. We have DNA evidence now, we have LIDAR, we have ground penetrating radar. There are tons of new tools that archaeology and history are using to come up with new stuff. And a lot of people are just really, really uncomfortable with their theories being erased because we now actually do have the evidence. And that comes through a lot of politicizing stuff as well. And this is true for places like Egypt and China, where you have these really, really strict government narratives of history. Some of the stuff that comes out isn't actually reported the way that it needs to be because it doesn't fit the actual and literal government-run narrative of what these countries' history looks like. So you got to be careful with that kind of stuff. You pick the story that integrates most easily with your worldview and make it part of your identity. Yeah, pretty much. What's up, Tanker? Good to see you. All historical questions are verified by reading the entrails of sacrificed animals. Absolutely. You know, the auspices must be read. You have to do these things. And if you don't have a Haruspex around to do that, you better reinstate them like Claudius did. And if you don't have any idea what I'm talking about, it's okay. It's a giant nerd history thing. They say history is written by the victor, so just how old is Victor anyway? Not 13, probably. This is why you don't burn libraries and confuse people with verbal garbage. That's, yeah, sure. He said, a historical dispute. Yeah, pretty much. We just guesstimated what the Gundams are behind Shane's head, but we may never know. That's fair. I can tell you what all of them are. And if you really want, I mean, I built most of these on stream. I built that one on stream, and I built this one on stream, and that 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 one, and that one, and this one, and that one. I built all those on stream, so there. Well, I deleted the evidence, but there are eyewitness accounts to these things. Also, what's up, Noger? Good to see you. Dun, dun, dun. Bum, ba-dum, bum, bum. Mojo Jojo, thank you so much for the follow. Welcome to the adventure. Love you a good Gundam build. Yeah, we do that. Well, I'll put it this way. I like to try to do a Gundam stream every weekend. I have not been able to do so lately because of way more things going on than I thought that I would have going on during the summer. But I did 2 of them last weekend, so there we go. You know I'm Macedonian descent. The only thing that we know of ancient Macedonians from Greek scholars in antiquity. That's not true. Scholars who indicate Macedonians are not Greek. Can this division actually be bigger? For example, Greek scholars provided Persian Greek names rather than Persian names. That's better. Well, I don't even think that the ancient Greeks thought the Macedonians were Greeks. And I think that's provable by examining even the Greek sources. And the Persians don't have a good historian from that time period. Most of the stuff that we know about Persia is from archaeology and Xenophon, if we're just being really honest. Some from Thucydides, of course, but... and some from China. Now, the Persian stuff that we have from a lot later, like the later Sassanid Persian stuff talking about the earlier Persian stuff, is not necessarily to be trusted. I mean, not even ancient Greek scholars, just the average ancient Greek person. If you look at... oh, well, I mean, there are a lot of different accounts. They didn't even speak the same language, right? There's a Macedonian dialect of Greek that wasn't what the Greeks spoke, and you can see this in Alexander the Great's records, where his generals argue about all of these new people getting brought in that don't speak the right language, you know, that are speaking Greek and they're not Macedonian by birth, and you can't trust them because they're not part of it. You get the honestly, okay, we can't go completely into this because we've been through this a lot of times already, but there's a thing that a lot of the Greeks use to claim the Macedonians, and they'll say, oh, well, the Macedonian kings participated in the Olympics. But if you actually read that account, the king of Macedonia went down to participate at the Olympics, and the sort of Olympic judges had to have a huddle. And they were like, we don't even know if we're going to let this guy in. And they're like, why should we let you compete? And he's like, oh, well, I'm descended from the Greeks. And they're like, I don't know about that, man. Tell me your story. So he told them the story of the Macedonian dynasty's heritage, and it apparently oppressed them enough to let him compete. And they're like, okay, look, not everybody from Macedonia can compete because this is for Greeks. But you can compete, and your kids can compete if you really want to. But what's notable here is that they give him a nickname at the end of that debate, and they give him the nickname Philhellene, which is friend of the Greeks. Now, if you were Greek, why would you need the nickname friend of the Greeks? That's like me saying, hi, I'm Shane, friend of the Americans. Are you not an American? Oh, yes, I am an American. I'm just friend of the Americans also. But anyway, we're so far off topic. Speaking of Macedonia, do you know what Anabasis means? The Greek term Anabasis is, or are you talking about the specific thing written by Xenophon, which is called the Anabasis? Anabasis is a trip from a coastline towards an inland location, and a description of it. Which is similar but not the same to a periplus, which is a trip around a body of water's edge. Yeah, I've read Xenophon. I've got a copy of it. It's at work in my office. Oh yeah, I love ancient history stuff. That's kind of my bag. I know this medieval stuff too, but like that's the ancient world is way more comfortable for me. On a scale of 0 to 10, how many rants did you throw about the Cleopatra show? Maybe 2. But I don't think any of it was about the casting. I think one rant was about how they titled it a documentary, but it was actually a drama. I don't like the fact that they called it a documentary when it was dramatized. That seems sketchy. And then I had one that was just general. Ancient people didn't have race like we have race today because modern race was invented during the Enlightenment by European people. So those were the only 2 rants that I had. I haven't seen the show. I don't plan on watching the show. I don't really care who they cast for this stuff. Yeah, I know. Okay, so I try not to get bent out of shape about stuff. I know that seems like it's a hard thing for me to do, but, not as many rants as Rings of Power, I bet. I really only have the one rant about Rings of Power, and I've repeated it a few times to people. But there's my official statement about Rings of Power. Get on with it. Yeah, there we go. Anyway, what's going on, culturally speaking, in the Abbasid Caliphate? I'll do this all the time, Frank. I'll chase rabbits like mad. Okay. One of the biggest things that's happening culturally during this 10th century is this big argument between Sunni and Shia. And this had gone on for quite some time. The Shia groups that were prevalent in the Muslim world had been targets of oppression, and they had been pushed out of power, even in regional areas, for quite some time. The really bad oppression of the Shia position started under the Umayyad dynasty, which is taking over right after the family of Muhammad. No, this is not the century where they sort all of that out. And if we're being really honest, Frank, there are still dramatic differences between Sunni and Shia. I think you might have been asking that sarcastically now that I see the smiley face. Okay, I gotcha. I gotcha. Okay. Anyway, so the Umayyads, especially the later Umayyads, and all of the Abbasids were very strongly Sunni. And what this means is the Shia Muslims had to be very quiet. And there were pockets of Shia that had spread all across the Muslim world, but they had to do so almost covertly. And places like Iran and Egypt and Syria and Northern Africa were all going to have a lot of these very quiet but growing Shia minorities. And specifically, during the time period that we're talking about, there were, put that in the wrong spot, Ismaili. there were a group of missionaries that were Shia missionaries called Ismaili. And this particular group was a sect of Shia that were sort of apocalyptic. They were spreading this message that the Mahdi was coming. The word Mahdi is an Arabic phrase. Some people want to translate that to Messiah. In English, it's not exactly the same. Some people want to translate that to Savior. It's not exactly the same. Is that the inspiration for Dune? It is 100% the inspiration for Dune. So this position of the Mahdi was a person who was going to come and sort of revitalize Islam in the way that it was supposed to be, which was going to trigger the end of the world. And at the end of the world world would be converted to Islam, and the last of the family of Muhammad would return or be revealed, depending on how you interpret the Shia beliefs. Some of them say that the last Imam was taken away and sort of put in like a hyperbaric time chamber where time doesn't exist to wait for the coming of the end of times. And other groups say that the family of Muhammad is still there. It's just secretly tracing its bloodline, and it has to be very, very quiet so that the rest of the world doesn't kill it. So depending on which interpretation, whatever you want. But the Ismaili were saying that the Mahdi was coming, and it's almost time. And they had a lot of success because things were getting bad, right? There were these political issues that were causing disruptions across the Muslim world, and a lot of people were wanting a change. They didn't like the way that the Abbasids were running things. They didn't really like the way that the culture was perhaps getting a little bit too far away from the tenets of Islam. With a lot of these riches and a lot of this trade and cosmopolitan nature, there were a lot of people doing stuff that didn't sit well with especially very conservative Muslims. People drinking, people, overindulging. This kind of stuff was not what a lot of people thought Islam was supposed to be about. So there was this sort of, this very slow but very deliberate spread of Shia in a lot of these places. And this is going to culminate with these rebellions, right? The Fatimids. The Fatimids, again, are going to trace their line all the way back to Muhammad, and they're going to say this is what gives them the legitimacy that they need. They're going to claim the universal right to rule, and there's going to be a war that gets started between the Fatimids and the Byzantines, especially over the island of Sicily. And the Fatimids are going to use this to kind of wave the flag of jihad, like they're standing up against the original enemies of Islam. They're the ones taking the fight to the Christians, right? The Karmatians, they're going to actually claim that they do have the Mahdi, that they had found the real Mahdi, and it ended up being this this sort of outspoken kid from Persia who ends up insulting the Prophet and saying a bunch of really horrible things about Islam and the Quran in public. So they ended up having to shut him up really, really quietly, and then he disappeared. But they used this as a while to start their rebellion and fuel the rebellion that they actually had the Mahdi with them, right? It doesn't really work that much. There was another group that's called the Hamanids. We haven't talked about them too terribly much, but they're a part of this patchwork of cultures that sort of pops up around this time. They were in the well, here I've actually got a map. Here we go. All right, so here's the Hamanid Emirate. It's right here in northern Mesopotamia in Syria, right here. The Hamanids were originally Sunni, but they had been surrounded by other Shia issues, especially when the Buyids. So the Buyids were Shia, and when they took over Baghdad, The Hammanids had Shia on one side and Shia in the Fatimid Caliphate over here. So in 969, they said, you know what? It's just easier for us to convert to Shia. So the Hammanids ended up switching over to Shia religion. So at this point, by the end of the 900s, there's still an Abbasid caliph that is still Sunni. But if you look at the actual ruling powers in the Muslim world, the vast majority of the money and the power were held by Sunni leaders. And you might think, oh, well, that's kind of crazy. This is a complete reversal from where it was 100 years earlier, and it actually was. But what this also starts leading people to do is they're like, okay, everybody's converting to Shia. This is the end of the world, right? Because at the end of the world, the whole world's supposed to convert to Islam, and then we're going to end up with the last imam, and all this stuff's going to happen again. With all these big powers converting to Shia Islam, people are like, oh, it's it. That's it. If the entire history of the world was a movie, who would have directed it? And why is it Martin Scorsese? It's not Martin Scorsese. It'd be way too dry if it were Martin Scorsese. You got to get like an in his prime. No, never mind. I'm taking that back. I don't know. Monty Python, Mel Brooks. I like Mel Brooks. Is the Sunni Shia difference more like Catholic Protestant distance, more like Catholic Orthodox? Okay, so very briefly, because this actually was an entire stream that we talked about back, oh gosh, probably a year and a half ago. At the end of Muhammad's life, he passed the title of caliph to his father-in-law. At the end of his father-in-law's life, his father-in-law passed the caliphate to one of Muhammad's cousins. At the end of that person's reign, a group of leading Muslims, including Muhammad's family, gave it to another one of Muhammad's cousins. At the end of that guy's reign, it went to Muhammad's son-in-law. So the first 5 caliphs after Muhammad were all in Muhammad's family. And this made a lot of people get really comfortable with the idea that Muhammad's family was the one that should rule Islam, right? Well, when Muhammad's son-in-law Ali took over, the guy that was really running most of the Islamic world was this dude named Muawiyah, who was not directly related to Muhammad. He was like maybe like a 7th cousin or something like that, right? Not enough to be really related. And he was the head of the military, and he was also the head of the most powerful and rich Muslim clan. And there were a lot of assassinations that happened after that. Both of Muhammad's grandkids got killed. Muhammad's son-in-law gets killed. And there's a big argument between who should run Islam. And some people are going to say it has to be Muhammad's family. And those are the Shia. And they do tend to be a bit more conservative than some of the Sunni. This isn't to say that there aren't conservative Sunni or that there aren't liberal Shia. If you ask most Muslim people in the regular, like if you go to a random mosque across the world, most people aren't really going to care very much for this particular distinction until you start talking about actual doctrinal theology, and then they're going to start showing differences. The issue is who runs Islam, and some people say it should be the Prophet's family. That's Shia, and other people say it's just whoever's the best Muslim. Doesn't really matter what family you're in, as long as you're the best Muslim, and that's the Sunni. And those are the big differences. Now, over time, because these two groups have been theologically separated, there are going to be other differences. For example, there are these collections of writings called hadith that are not part of the Quran, but they do have religious weight. The Hadith is a gigantic collection of thousands of individual pieces of literature, and depending on whether or not you are Sunni or Shia, some of them are going to be accepted by both, but some of them are only going to be accepted by one side or the other. Also, when it comes to things like particular interpretations of the Quran, certain interpretations are going to favor one side or the other. And it's not necessarily comparable to the Catholic Protestant or the Catholic Orthodox situation. But if I had to pick one, it would be closer to the Catholic Orthodox situation. Probably. But it's not a good metaphor. I would not make that either of those comparisons directly if I were talking about this in an academic setting. The relationship between the two is kind of unique, and I don't think it best serves either of them to cast that in disputes between Christian denominations. But I mean, I see where you're coming from, and I'm not trying to criticize that coming off the bat. I was just I wouldn't use either of those references. But it's a fair question, and if you want to know some more about that, you're welcome to catch me in chat on. Like in Discord or something like that, and I'd be happy to elaborate. All right, so with these regional differences, we also get cultural differences in stuff like, I mean, just everyday items. And the Fatimids, especially being so big and powerful, are going to start having a really big impact on things outside of their territory. And one of the things that is very frequently pointed at is the impact of Fatimid architecture. So this is a really big mosque called the Al-Azhar Mosque. It is in Cairo. By the way, the Fatimids are going to found Cairo, and that's going to be their capital. So the modern-day capital of Egypt was one of the early Fatimid capitals. If you've been watching the streams, specifically when we're talking about Muslim architecture and things like that, you'll note some differences, specifically here with the way that these minarets are built and the way that their domes are built. But there are also some smaller differences here, especially with these little crow-stepped peaks, the crenellations here along the top of this walkway, and a little bit with the way that they actually do the sort of base decoration of this stuff. If this were somewhere further in the east, perhaps a Samanid mosque, you might see a lot more intricate decoration on this. But here we have just a little bit more sort of just very pretty stuff. Here's another example. This is a mosque called the Al-Hakim Mosque. And you get the same sort of feeling here. Your minarets are going to be a little bit more chunky and sort of tower-ish looking, as opposed to just skinny little pillars. You have your little crow-stepped crenellations, and again, just sort of a flat facade that's a little bit more clean, or perhaps a bit more reserved, or maybe pious if you're looking at it that way. Both of these, though, are in Cairo and are pretty good examples of Fatimid architecture, which becomes very, very important and has a pretty big influence, again, outside of just the Fatimid territory. Now, this is something that is really interesting that the Fatimids are going to sort of, I guess, bring back. This is a particular type of fabric art that's called a tiraz. And a tiraz is basically a very intricately woven piece of fabric that has all kinds of cool little decorations and stuff on it. And these would have been used for, decorations, put on walls or to put on tables or things like that. But they would have also been sometimes used just as, pretty pieces of art. And you just trade these back and forth, and they get collected and things like that. So if we look here, you can see that this is just very, very intricate stitching that would have created all of these pieces. Just absolutely tons of hours of work would have gone into making one of these. Really, really cool though. And these become particularly common in the Fatimid world. You're going to start seeing those all over the place. And one of the reasons why that is quite as popular as it used to be is because of these influences that the Fatimids are going to start picking up from other parts of the world. When they take over such a big territory that they have, they're going to start getting that exposure to other people, right? You get more exposure, you get more ideas, and you start sort of interpreting that in your own way. And the best example of that I can offer you are these guys. This is what's called lusterware. And this is originally something that had been done up in Syria, but it is going to become really popular in the Fatimid world. And a lot of the pieces are sort of like this. You kind of get some animal motif going on. But if you look at this piece, this is a piece of Fatimid lusterware here. And just right away, it might strike you as kind of odd. Like, especially if you know anything about Islamic art, you go, well, why is there a dude on that, right? Aren't they not big fans of using human images in artwork? Well, not every Muslim world group of people has a strict ban on figure drawing in art. So you see this again. We talked about this a little bit with the Samanids over in Central Asia, but the Fatimids, you know, not confused with lusterware. That's Moche stuff. Yes, from a few hundred years before. But yeah, I see the pun there. But anyway, this kind of stuff is going to be very, very popular, and it starts becoming a really big trade idea. And people from all over the Mediterranean world, and even as far over into Central Asia, and to a certain extent, even over into the far eastern part of Asia, are going to start collecting this kind of stuff. Because it's very beautiful, it's a high level of skill, as you might expect. These are going to fetch quite a bit of money at market. So, you know, it's what you want and it's what you got. Now, as part of this cultural change, there is going to be a new group that's, well, I mean, they're not necessarily new, but they're definitely a group that had not been around for a while. The Bagratid Armenians. Now, if we look at the map and recall our ancient history, we might remember that this entire region right around here used to be ancient Armenia. Now, Armenia had been conquered under the original Umayyad expansions of Islam into that area. Prior to that, the Armenian region had been fought over between the Persians and the Romans for hundreds of years, and there had not been an independent Armenia in centuries. But when the central authority of the Abbasids break down, there is going to be a guy named Ashot. Specifically Ashot the First, which is a shot in the arm, that is going to start making some moves. And before long, what we end up with is a kingdom of Armenia. And here we have the Bagratuni Kingdom of Armenia. Because this is a thing that we haven't talked about before in reference to Islamic powers. The Bagratids are Christians, and they're going to get enough power to effectively break away from the Abbasid Caliphate. Now, this happens originally with Ashot, who gets the title of prince. And Ashot, by the way, lives 884 to 890. So this is a little bit before our time period, but it fits with the story that we're telling today. When he broke powerful, or when he got to the point where he was strong, he sort of demanded the title king. And the Abbasid caliphs were going through so much trouble at this point with the Tulunid rebellion and things like that, that the Abbasids sent him a crown. Now, to not be outdone, the Byzantine emperors are going to send him a crown. The guy that's the emperor at that point is John. John the First, I believe. And he gets recognized as king both by the Byzantines and by the Caliphate. Now, he's still technically part of the Caliphate, but if we're being honest, this is a new sort of player on the field. And if you'll recall back when I first started doing this phase, this 10th century phase, I said that there were a lot of these countries that deserve entire streams of their own, but that I unfortunately won't be able to do, because if I did an individual stream for every single one of these interesting countries, we would never finish. The Bagratids are absolutely one of them. The Bagratids are fascinating. If we move through the early 900s, what we're going to see is the Armenians gaining more and more independence. Now, this is at their own, not detriment, but at their own danger, because both the Byzantines and the Abbasids claim control of Armenia. The Byzantines do so because they are Christians and they head Christianity. So Armenians should be part of the Byzantine Empire. The Abbasids do this because they claim the territory on the ground. And what ends up happening is that the Armenians are going to fight both the Byzantines and the Abbasids. And in fact, one of their kings, Smumbat, is going to get assassinated by some Muslims. And his head gets chopped off and sent back to Baghdad. But what's going to end up happening during this moment where they kind of get forced to pick is they pick neither. The Armenians have an independent Christian church that is headed by their own leadership, and they refuse to submit to the Byzantine Patriarch in Constantinople. They have their own political leadership. The Byzantines end up putting a guy named Ashot II in power, but then when he refuses to bend the knee to the Byzantines, they actually try to destabilize him. So it's like the Byzantines put him in power, and then when he was independent, they're like, oh man, forget this guy, and they try to push him out too. But what ends up happening is that the Armenians are going to try to sit this whole thing out. They want to be independent. And one of the big things that happens as a result of this is they move to a place called Ani. Good news, you get to pick which one of us you want. Yeah, pretty much. You have the luxury of choosing. And I get to put on the adventure hat here. So one of the first capitals of the Bagratid Armenians is this place called Kars. It's spelled with a K, K-R-S, K-A-R-S. And for those of you that don't know what this is the adventure hat. And when I've been to a place and I get to show you pictures of things that I've been to, I get to wear the adventure hat. And this is one of the first Armenian churches that gets built under an independent Armenia. And this is the church at Kars. I've been here. I've actually also been up to this big hill here to look back over the city. Here's my car. I feel safe. But this city of Ani is impressive. And there's a reason why it's impressive. And most notably, it's because when the Armenians build Ani. They build it specifically because they want to make a position that nobody's going to be able to attack. They want to choose a place that is defensible. And I'm looking right now for these. So these are the walls of Ani. And you can go visit them today. They're in the modern day country of Turkey. And so these walls date from the late 900s, and they were upkept for several hundred years after. And they are big old walls, and they contain within them a whole ton of territory. So you see here that there's actually a double line of walls. This is where a cannonball hit it. The later Ottomans took over the capital here. Defense is overrated if you want open fields all around. In modern Turkey, not unlike a lot of Armenian Christians. Correct. So, what we're looking at here are the walls of Ani and looking across the site of ancient Ani. And you can see here several different locations that are part of the capital. This over here is a giant gulch that is super duper deep, and across this river and on the other side of the gulch is modern Armenia. I spent, there's a picture of Dan, the guy that I was traveling with. I spent an entire day at Ani last year. This is my attempt at making a solidarity picture with the modern Armenians. By the way, there's not a border crossing where modern Armenians can easily access Ani. This is their ancient capital. Modern Armenians are still majority Christian. They would love to be able to come visit Ani, and the modern Turks do not make it easy for them. But this is the gorge that I was talking about, and at the bottom you see the river, and looking across here, I don't know if you can tell or not, but there's a flag flying on this hill, and that is the Armenian flag. So this is me looking through one of the gates to the ancient city of Ani at modern Armenia, on this other side, where I'm in Armenia and I'm looking at Armenia, and those people over there couldn't get over here. Me trying to be a little bit mushy. I have tons of photos. I was at Ani all day long. I have probably 1,000 photos from that site. But we can't go through all of them because we just don't have time. And if somebody wanted to do a viewer request stream, I could do an entire stream just on Ani, or we could do stuff on the Armenians. Anyway, the guy that builds Ani is Ashot the Third. There are really big walls here. There is a giant castle with a keep and subsequent walls behind the big walls. And the Byzantines want Armenia, and the Abbasids want Armenia, and the Armenians just want to be left alone. And that's a pretty big cultural shift, because I don't think anybody thought at the beginning of the troubles of the Abbasids, hey, we're going to lose a whole bunch of territory to an independent Christian kingdom. Probably not what they would have put on the list. Now, if you said, hey, we're going to lose a lot of territory to the Byzantines, that they might have begrudgingly gone, well, I guess that's not horrible of an expectation. That's not a non-zero chance. But they would not have guessed hey, there's going to be an independent Christian kingdom right on your border, and it's not going to be with the Byzantines, and it's not going to really like you either, and they're going to do their thing. So there's a lot of shift going on in the Abbasid world during this period of time. And they started off the century at a pretty good note. And they're going to end up the century not even really in control of their own capital. Their territory is going to get ripped into shreds. It's going to be ruled by 5 or 6 different other territories. The Fatimids, the Buyids, the Hamanids, Karmatians, Armenians, the Byzantines. And while the Abbasids are going to hang on for another couple hundred years, they are basically donezo. They are never going to return to the apex of their power. So, but at that note, I have reached the end of what I would have prepared for the night. So, if you have questions about anything, or if you want to redeem any channel points or anything like that, now is the time to do so. Hope that was interesting for everybody. I really like this period of history, and I would absolutely love to spend a whole lot more time talking about Armenia. And I kind of thought about doing it anyway, but we've got to make some unfortunate calls. What's in the news? Lots of stuff. You got something specific, or you got something just like about blah, 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 blah. I haven't watched it yet because I wanted to watch it with my wife, and we didn't have a time where we could both sit down and pay attention to it. What is in the news? I can talk about... okay. One thing that has happened that is Islam adjacent, and I was talking about this with the mods just before I started the stream today. A couple of days ago, there was a protest in Sweden. So Sweden, of course, country that has freedom of speech laws, freedom of assembly laws, etc. Right here. A particular individual asked for a permit to protest outside of the largest mosque in Sweden. The government, seeing nothing that would prohibit the protest, allowed him the permit to do so. This was one individual who stood on a sidewalk and yelled some stuff through a megaphone, and then got out a Quran and stomped on it, and then ripped some pages out of it and burned the pages. Now, before we go any further, let me just say, that's not a cool thing, right? That's disrespectful. Now, that being said, it's also not illegal. He did everything that he was supposed to do. He got the permit. And this brings us to a larger question of, does free speech mean that even the jerkweeds get free speech? And the answer is yes. Now, of course, the response to this across the Muslim world has been that Sweden hates Muslim people. The Swedish government is not really in favor of this kind of stuff happening, especially because one of the biggest countries that has a problem with this is Turkey, who is key in Sweden getting into NATO. So this has not helped the Swedish government's position, but the Swedish government follows its rules. At least it did in this particular situation. I'm sure if we looked around past a cursory glance, we could find people within Sweden's government that are corrupt. People are corrupt. But in this situation, it looks like the law was followed. Does that mean I want people to go burn Qurans? No. I said that was a jerk move at the top. But does that mean I think that people should be able to burn Qurans if it's legal and they do everything the right way and they follow the rules? Yeah. I don't like that, though. But here's the thing about about freedom. Uh, it's got to be free, right? I don't like the fact that a lot of people get on the internet and spread bullcrap. That's just obviously demonstrably false. I don't like the fact that people get on the internet and talk hate speech to people. I don't like the fact that most of social media exists, if we're just being honest. I think we could probably do without a lot of it. But does that mean I think we should deny the people the right to do that stuff? No. I don't like it, but that doesn't mean it's illegal. And that sucks that that's in that position. And, were I in the position of the local mayor, would I have handled that any differently? Maybe. Maybe I would have asked this guy why he wanted to protest. And then maybe I could have reached out to the leader of the mosque and said, hey, why don't we have a conversation? And why don't we try to sit down and figure out why this particular person's so angry and why they might want to protest? It's a lot easier to yell at a building than it is to yell at a person. But at the end of the day, would I have let that guy go out there protesting knowing that he was going to burn a Quran? Maybe so. Would I have liked that? No. Do I even like hypothetically answering that question? No. Because it's kind of it is not even kind of, it's a jerk move. It's a butthole thing to do. But it's also not illegal. A lot of things are butthole things to do, but not illegal. And if we're going to let people start picking and choosing what isn't and what is allowable, it's a mess. It's a big mess. I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to death your right to say it. I knew that there was a quote, something like that. I didn't know who said it, and I didn't want to misquote it. And it's a messy situation, but this is the world that we live in, and there are differences of opinion, and there are big differences of opinion. And I think that instead of resorting to the most negative things that we could think about, maybe we should try talking with people first. And I would bet that if you had asked this protester, even just to slow down, like, hey, before you go do that, why don't we try to sit down with these people and talk? And maybe you can get some answers. Maybe you can have some conversation. There's a dialogue. I would bet that would have changed the outcome. But what ends up happening in the modern world way too frequently is that people find a difference and then immediately think, I don't have to treat this person like a person. And that's not cool, right? That's just not cool. Don't do that, right? Talk to people. If you have a difference with somebody, talk to them about it and be respectful. And, maybe you might find out that your opinion isn't actually based on truth. Or maybe your opinion is based on some, cultural bias that you didn't even know you had. Or maybe your differences are actually reconcilable. And you don't actually have to have differences at all. Now, this isn't to say that every scenario requires some sort of rapprochement where everybody's happy at the end. Clearly, there are reprehensible beliefs that don't need to be promulgated, right? I'm not trying to tell you to go hug a Nazi. That's not what I'm saying. But before we resort to being an absolute butthole, maybe we should just talk it out a little bit. I think that's kind of the point here. And it's a messy scenario over in Sweden. But do I think that dude's activities should keep NATO from having another member? Nah. And it's also a little bit... It's a little bit disturbing that what is ultimately being questioned here is whether or not a government is going to brutally infringe upon an individual's their population's right to freedom of speech for access to a military treaty group. I don't think that's a scenario that's viable, right? Erdogan is more interested in being a power player than defending Islam. I think that's probably a fair assessment. The burden of being the good guy is that you have to be the good guy. Yeah, sometimes. That's part of it. All right. If anybody's got anything else, now is the time. Otherwise, we're going to go see... we're going to go find somebody to do the raid. And bring all of our eyeballs to another location. Who we gonna raid? Is there any mechanism by which the government can publicly insult this fellow while not actually punishing him? I mean, somebody in the government could stand up and say in public, like, hey, we don't, as a culture here, approve of this guy, but as a culture, we also respect the fact that this guy gets to have his opinion, but we as a culture don't want to go burn the Quran or stomp on it because that's not really the kind of people that we are. And I think that would be perfectly viable for somebody to do. And I would even kind of support that statement if they wanted to say it. Yeah, I mean, everybody can just say, hey, that's not us, and we don't think he should have done that. But we also, you know, yeah, what KP was saying. All right, I think we're going to go raid Melissa in Denial. Melissa is an Egyptologist, and she's currently playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey. So we're going to go just drop in and say hi while she's stabbing things, running around a fort, doing all that fun stuff. But we'll be back next week. Of course, I'd like to do a stream over the weekend where we build some Gundam stuff. We're just about done with the one that we're working on now. Got to do some more water slides. We don't have a viewer request next week unless I just get extra froggy and decide to jump. But we will have a stream on Thursday next week, which is the next guaranteed time that you'll see me back. But until then, everybody, thanks for hanging out. Hope that everybody has a lovely time this weekend. And until next time, take it easy.